Bear down, fam. Joey BOSA is one step away from signing with the Chicago Bears, and in a minute, I'll break down why that could be Ryan Poles' biggest free agency mistake of the year. Meanwhile, Athlon Sports just put a number on Montez Sweat's 2026 season, and that number looks short to me. I'll give you the real number I'm betting on, and why it changes Chicago's entire defensive plan. But today's bombshell is in the backfield. Kyle Monangai has missed 3 straight practices, according to ESPN's Courtney Cronin, and that exposed a problem with DeAndre Swift that nobody at Hollis Hall wanted to deal with in time. Adam Schefter already said it on his podcast about BOSA. This is not just another rumor. $8.1 million in cap space, and Ryan Poles has to choose between the pass rush, the backfield, or risking both blowing up on him in October. BOSA, Sweat, Swift, the 3 stories defining the rest of Bears training camp are all connected by the same problem, and I'm breaking it all down right now. Bear down. Fam, this is what has me hooked this week. Joey BOSA, the 3rd overall pick in the 2016 draft, a 5-time Pro Bowler, is sitting at home without a contract at this point on the calendar, working on his golf swing instead of his first step toward the quarterback. And the Chicago Bears, according to recent reports, are among the teams that should be calling his agent right now. Let us build out the full context here, because this story has layers, and I think most of the public conversation is staying on the surface. BOSA played his entire career with the Chargers after they drafted him in 2016, signed a 5-year extension worth $135 million, and ended up getting cut by Los Angeles before the 2025 season. From there, he went to Buffalo on a 1-year deal with $12 million guaranteed, and he had a season that, honestly, was not bad, but also was not his best years. 5 sacks and 5 forced fumbles in 15 games. Rotational numbers, not centerpiece numbers, but also the numbers of a player who can still make the kind of play that swings a game, which is exactly what we are looking for when we talk about complimenting Montez Sweat. Now, at 31 years old, he is still unsigned in August, which is already unusual for a player with his resume. And this is where the story gets interesting, because there are 3 possible paths for BOSA, and each one tells you something different about what could happen with the Bears. The first path is the one everybody wants to see: the reunion with his brother Nick in San Francisco. It sounds perfect on paper. 2 BOSA brothers, both from Ohio State, even though they never overlapped there since Joey had already left by the time Nick arrived in 2016, playing together for the first time since high school in Florida. The problem is that the Niners' own general manager, John Lynch, went out and put water on that fire at the owners' meetings in April. He said, and I am quoting this because the moment calls for it, that Mama BOSA would love to see them together, but he does not know if the team can afford him. That line, coming from the GM and not a reporter speculating, is basically an elegant way of saying it will not happen unless San Francisco's financial situation changes drastically, something that could happen if they move on from Brandon Ayuk or sort out the Trent Williams situation, but that is not guaranteed today. And on top of that, Nick BOSA himself threw more fuel on the fire just a few days ago. He was asked in an interview whether his brother was coming to San Francisco or retiring, and Nick answered that Joey is more focused on his golf game than on football right now. And look, that line sounds like a little brother's joke, but when you look at it coldly, it is a real signal. Players do not joke about a brother's retirement unless there is something real behind the joke. Adam Schefter was even more direct on his podcast. He said, it is more likely than not that Joey BOSA has already played his last down in the NFL. That is a strong statement coming from the most connected source in the league, and it should not be brushed aside. So if the San Francisco path is closing and retirement is genuinely on the table, why am I still talking about BOSA as a real piece for the Bears? Because there is a third option, and it is the one Complex Sports put on the table a couple weeks ago. If BOSA decides he wants to keep playing and wants a guaranteed, impactful role, Chicago is one of the few places where that actually exists right now, much more than Minnesota, where he would have to compete for reps behind Dallas Turner and Andrew Van Ginkel in a scheme that already has established pieces. Think about the real need here for the Bears. They have Montez Sweat as their number 1 pressure generator, and on the other side of the line, they need somebody who can be a consistent threat, not just a rotational body-filling minutes. BOSA, at his best between 2019 and 2021, combined for 29.5 sacks over 3 seasons and was one of the most feared edge players in the league. He is not that version anymore, and nobody with any sense is pretending he is. But his ability to force fumbles, which stayed intact in Buffalo with 5 forced fumbles last year in just 15 games, is exactly the kind of situational impact play that a contending roster needs at specific points in the calendar, not necessarily 50 snaps a game. And here's the number that ties everything we are talking about today together. The Bears have $8.1 million in cap space according to Over the Cap. That is not a fortune, but it is mathematically enough for a 1-year deal similar to what Buffalo gave BOSA. modest with incentives tied to snaps and production. If BOSA genuinely wants to keep playing and wants to go somewhere he is actually needed, instead of being the fourth or fifth option in the rotation, Chicago is objectively the best role on offer anywhere in the free agent market right now. Now, I want to be honest with you about why I have genuine doubts this gets done soon, or gets done at all. First, there's the age and the injury history. 31 years old for an edge rusher who already carries a complicated medical history. Remember, at one stretch of his Chargers career, he played only 14 games combined across 2 full seasons, is a real risk, not a paper risk that a good scouting report solves. Second, if he is genuinely thinking about retiring like his own brother suggests, no secondary role contract in Chicago is going to convince him to strap the pads back on for 1 more year. And third, Ryan Poles already has a recent history with complicated medical acquisitions on this roster, and I honestly do not think he wants to repeat that pattern with a 31-year-old who has not trained football seriously in months, according to his own brother. My position, being direct, I think this ends in one of 2 ways. Either BOSA retires before the regular season starts, closing the door on any interested team, or he signs an emergency deal after somebody suffers a serious injury in camp. And that is where the Bears should be in the conversation, because the need for a real complement to Sweat is not going to solve itself with the current roster. I could be wrong about this, honestly. But if Chicago does not pick up the phone in the coming weeks, and then in October they still have not fixed the pass rush at the trade deadline, that will be a fair criticism of Poles, and we will have it on record. And here is where I am going to plant a flag that I know will not sit well with everybody. Personally, I do not want the Bears to sign BOSA, not even as the emergency plan. And I am not saying this because of the player, I am saying it because of the pattern. This front office already got burned betting on bodies with complicated medical history, hoping the talent would cover the risk. And both times, it tried that it ended up paying the cost in lost snaps and a stalled development plan. BOSA, at 31, not training seriously according to his own brother, is that exact same profile again, just with a better resume and worse timing. I would rather 1,000 times over see Poles put those $8.1 million into a 23 or 24-year-old free agent who still has room to develop, even if his ceiling looks lower on paper, than sign a feel-good comeback story that probably lasts 6 weeks before showing up on the injury report. I know this sounds like I do not want the team to get better. It is the opposite. I want it to get better in a way that does not blow up in their face again in November. And this connects directly to what we just talked about, because the problem with Chicago's pass rush was never that Montez Sweat is bad. It is that Sweat is basically out there carrying the weight alone, and that has a real statistical ceiling no matter how much individual talent he has. Athlon Sports came out this week with a specific direct prediction: 11 sacks for Sweat in 2026. Let us look at that number seriously, because there are good arguments on both sides, and I do not want to oversimplify this. First, the real context of where Sweat is coming from. He had 10 sacks in 2025, a big jump compared to 5.5 in 2024. It was his best season since 2023, the year he got traded from Washington to Chicago mid-season, and finished with 12.5 combined sacks between both teams that year. Since 2022, Sweat has had at least 8 sacks in 3 of those seasons, and 10 or more in 2 of them. In other words, this is not a player with one lucky season that is about to regress to the mean. This is a sustained pattern of production year after year. And the pressure numbers from PFF, which I am citing explicitly as third-party data, because that is always how it should be treated and never as independent fact. Back that reading up. 460 pass rush snaps on the season, 13th in the entire NFL in that count. 54 total pressures, 18th in the league. 37 hurries, 11th place. That workload, combined with that production, is not luck, and it is not one fortunate streak of a year. This is a player who is on the field constantly and who keeps creating real problems for opposing tackles week after week. Now here is my specific disagreement with the prediction of 11 sacks. Sweat turns 30 on September 4th, right at the start of the season. And the main reason Athlon predicts just 1 more sack than last year is because it basically assumes the workload stays exactly the same, with no real help next to him. But look who is coming back into the rotation. Dayo Odeyingbo, recovering from an Achilles injury, according to the CH Gio Bears account just a few days ago. And look who is already locked in on the roster. Austin Booker, 23 years old, who had 4.5 sacks last year as the 3rd best producer on the team in that metric in basically his first real season. And Gervin Dexter Sr., generating 6 sacks from the interior. A solid number for a defensive tackle. If Odeyingbo comes back healthy for the start of the season, and Booker takes the kind of second-year jump young edge rushers with real physical talent tend to take, the pressure on Sweat as the only genuine threat on the defensive front drops considerably. And when a pass rusher stops being the rival's single top priority, his individual numbers usually go up. not down, because the other team can no longer dedicate a double team to him on every critical snap. My honest read, no sugarcoating, with my own number on the record, so it is there in black and white. I am saying 13 sacks for Sweat in 2026, not 11. And I am saying it knowing that if Odeyingbo has a setback with that Achilles in October, the way I have trusted other players on this exact defensive line before who then showed up on the injury report, I'm going to have to eat that number on camera. But my bet comes down to something simple. Athlon is predicting the same Montez Sweat as last year. I am predicting a different defensive front around him. That is the real gap between their number and mine, and that is why I'm staking my claim at 13. And this is exactly how it connects to the story we just heard. Watch how this links up. If Odeyingbo is not ready in time for the regular season, or if Booker does not take that jump many of us expect from him, the need for an outside piece like Joey BOSA stops being a contender's luxury and becomes a real urgency right around October, at the exact moment he would show up on the trade market or the emergency free agent market. The Bears' pass rush keeps being, season after season under this front office, the piece that decides whether this defense ends up truly elite or just good on paper close out today. Let us talk about something that had been brewing quietly for months and finally exploded this week in camp. The depth behind DeAndre Swift. Kyle Monangai has missed 3 straight practices, according to ESPN's Courtney Cronin on August 1st, with an injury that has not been made public yet. And look, I'm not here to alarm anybody over an undefined preseason injury. That would be cheap sensationalism. But what this absence did, without meaning to, was expose something several analysts had been flagging since March, without anybody at Hollis Hall seeming to treat it as a real priority. The Bears do not have a real plan B behind Swift. Let us start with the numbers, because that is the foundation of this whole argument. Swift is coming off a season of 1,087 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns in 2025, with a real plus as a receiver coming out of the backfield, which is exactly the kind of versatility Ben Johnson needs in his scheme. He is 27 years old and his contract expires at the end of this season. And here is my opinion, straight up. So it is clear. That extension should have gotten done this offseason. It should not still be an open conversation at this point in August, with camp already running. Dalwhinnie City put it well this week in their column. There is not a single running back on the current roster behind Swift with real, established starting experience in the NFL. And they are completely right to flag it as an urgent priority and not an editorial whim. But the real problem is not just Swift and his contract. It is what happens exactly when Swift or Monangai are not available for any reason, which happens every single year in the NFL without exception. Look who ended up as the de facto emergency option this week. Salvon Ahmed, 27 years old, signed for just 1 year and $1.215 million, coming off a broken ankle last season with the Colts from an illegal hip drop tackle that cost him the entire 2025 campaign. Before that, his best real showing came in 2020 with Miami when he was still a rookie. 319 yards, 4.3 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns in just 6 games played. Since then, in total, 163 career carries and just 593 total yards accumulated across several seasons. That, honestly, is not a reliable backup plan for an offense that genuinely wants to fight for the NFC this year. And that is why Roshan Johnson becomes an interesting story exactly this week. 227 pounds, the biggest running back on the entire roster by a wide margin, playing in his contract year, needing to finally prove he is worth a real role after being basically invisible since Ben Johnson arrived except on special teams units. If Monangai stays out this week, Johnson is going to get first and second team reps, and that is a concrete, real opportunity to lock down a spot on the final 16-man roster, something that was far from guaranteed for him until recently. Here is my direct criticism of the front office, and I am saying it without a filter because I think they earned it. Ryan Poles has a pattern, and we have talked about this on this channel in previous episodes, of waiting too long on decisions that look pretty obvious from the outside. The Swift extension is exactly that kind of decision. It is not complicated from a negotiation standpoint. It does not require months of back and forth. He is a productive running back with relatively low injury risk compared to other positions, playing in an offense designed by a coach who has historically gotten the best out of whatever running back talent he has available. Every week this gets postponed is one more week of unnecessary uncertainty in a locker room that needs stability, not contract drama, before the real start of the season. And let me offer a read of my own here that I have not seen anywhere else this week, so take it for what it is, my own theory and not a confirmed fact. I do not think Poles is simply sleeping on the Swift extension. I think he is using it as leverage on purpose, waiting to see if Monangai comes back healthy, and if Ahmed or Johnson answer the bell in preseason, so he can negotiate from a position where Swift knows the team has, at least on paper, internal alternatives. It is a cold poker move, very typical of this GM. The problem is, we already saw this week exactly how expensive that poker game can get. If Monangai's injury turns out to be serious, Poles loses the leverage card and the depth at the same time, and that plan flips against him at the worst possible moment. And here is the final connection to everything we talked about today, to close the full circle. The same $8.1 million in cap space that could go toward a player like Joey BOSA would also have to cover any additional move in the backfield if Poles decides, at some point in August or September, that he needs more backup than just Ahmed and Johnson behind Swift. This front office is managing a genuinely tight budget with too many simultaneous needs on the table at the same time. And at some point on the calendar, something is going to have to give. The real question, the one we should be asking ourselves as fans, is whether Poles prioritizes the pass rush, prioritizes the backfield, or keeps kicking both decisions down the road and simply trusts the current roster to hold up until health lets him solve it calmly. And there you have it, fam. 3 stories, 1 real connecting thread. Ryan Poles has important decisions pending on both the pass rush and the backfield, a limited budget to solve both at once, and a window that keeps closing with every camp practice that passes without answers. Joey BOSA could end up being the emergency piece this team needs if the young pass rush does not take the jump we are all hoping for. Montez Sweat can absolutely clear 11 sacks if Odeyingbo and Booker do their part. And DeAndre Swift needs his extension now before another backfield injury forces the Bears to improvise in the middle of the regular season when there is no longer extra time to fix it calmly. Bear down, always. If this helped you out, hit the like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments. Should Poles go after BOSA if he is still available during camp? Or do you trust Booker and Odeyingbo to fix the pass rush on their own without outside help? I am reading every single one of you. See you in the next one.